Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hope Discovered podcast by CommQuest. My name is Bill. Today, we are speaking to Elaine Russell Reolfi. Elaine, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bill. I'm honored to be here.
Great. It's great to have you. Elaine is the Chief Executive Officer of CommQuest Services, Incorporated. CommQuest is a nonprofit organization whose mission is stated as to provide care and advocacy for people through three pillars of service, which are mental health, addiction recovery, and social support. CommQuest Services is one of the largest nonprofit mental health and social services organizations in Northeast Ohio, working with clients from over 34 counties in 12 facilities through more than 20 programs. We serve our clients through outpatient services, school-based mental health services, substance abuse prevention programs, residential facilities, a detox facility, a homeless shelter, and a social and payee center, among many other things. Now, that's quite a mouthful, and we can't cover all that today. We're not going to try. But the first question I would have for you to kind of encapsulate that, when you're talking to someone and you say, I work at CommQuest Services, and they say, CommQuest, what is that? What is your answer?
Well, I think you stole my answer already because I really describe it in those three pillars of service that you talked about, that we provide mental health services, addiction recovery, and social support. And I think, that's the most direct and easy answer to that question. But I think that the bigger answer to that question is we're really trying to build a safe and welcoming community so that people who are suffering from social, emotional, or addiction issues have a safe place where they can recover.
Yes.
And I think probably the most eloquent answer to that question is our promise to the community. Hope happens here.
Yes.
I just love that. When I joined CommQuest and I saw, that is our promise to the community, that really touches me. It touches my personality and who I am, because I believe that you have to be realistic in life, but you always have to have a dose of hope and optimism and believing that maybe more is possible than you might think. You have to have a little bit of hope in there with your hard work. Yes,
it has to be a driving force. I would certainly agree with that. Leading into, you talked about first coming here. It hasn't been a year yet. Most of your career has been with large companies in a very corporate environment, a focus on business, certainly an international marketplace. What made you decide to come to CommQuest?
Well, I gotten to the point in my career where I had spent decades in public companies and business. And I thought, I've got another 10, 15 years left in my career. What do I want to do with it? Yeah. And throughout my whole career, I had spent a lot of time in volunteer capacities working on boards and had always been drawn to nonprofits that worked with the poor and underserved, mental health related. And so it's spent a lot of time in that world. And also my job in the companies I was in, a certain aspect of it was community relations. We knew that you have to have a strong community to operate in, or it's hard to, find the workforce you need. And I'd also found working around the world as we were trying to build our brand in new markets that a holistic approach to coming into a new market is important. So we used to sure look at marketing communications and that sort of thing, but we also looked at government relations, meeting the community leaders, and becoming a part of the fabric of every community we were in, whether that be in, a little town in China, a little town in India, or a little town in Ohio. And so that was always my orientation, that you have to take a holistic look at business. And that naturally led me into all kinds of aspects of community relations and working with nonprofits.
That's very interesting, actually. You often tell the story. I've heard you tell it a couple times out at our events and so forth. One of your first days here, you were visiting the women in
let me tell the story, Bill.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
It's my favorite story. And actually anybody who knows me, who has asked me how things are going these first 6 or 7 months, has heard the story. So I want to tell it for the 300th time. It's my favorite story. Yeah. My very first week here, the very first time I met clients, I was invited. I started on a Monday, and on a Thursday of that week in April, I was invited out to lunch at Deliverance House, which is our women's residential addiction treatment facility. And I went there and I sat down at the tables, and all the ladies who were in the house were there, and they were talking and they were celebrating their stories of recovery. And this little guy was zooming around the floor in his walker. And that's when I learned, first of all, that we allow women to bring their children up to 5 years of age to Deliverance House with them, because a mom shouldn't have to choose between her own recovery and her children. And so I think it's a beautiful thing. But as I looked into the little guy's face, it just really hit me what's at stake. You know, I could see his mom, and she was talking about her sobriety, but it's not just about his mom. It's about the little guy. It's about breaking a cycle in families of addiction, and so much more is at stake than just the individual client we treat. And I tell that story so often because his little face is sort of that thing that drives me. I think about that all the time. And I think about how we might be making his life better and his family's life better. Yeah.
In a lot of cases, these young children that we often notice may not have one of their parents if these issues are not corrected. So it's a very powerful effect that something seemingly very simple, like watching a child, can have on you. And I certainly understand why that had an impact on you.
Well, and I think that sometimes people think of mental illness and addiction as things that happen to other people. Sure. And we know that this touches people from every background, every walk of life, and it could be anybody. And, I think that we need to understand that little guy can be any of our children, and we have to think about it that way.
Since you've been here, have you noticed, are you, maybe more aware of it, or have you always been aware of it? Has the stigma around mental health improved over the past number of years, or what is your opinion about that?
Well, first of all, I have been aware of that for many years. I think most of my career has been in jobs working with people, trying to persuade people to do things, trying to bring out the best in people. And certainly when I became responsible for HR at a big company, you see the impact of these issues. And what's always been really tragic to me is that the stigma related to mental illness and addiction prevent people from getting treatment. Yeah. And that's a tragedy. And so even in my old jobs, I did everything I can to talk out loud about it. We'd have the leader of our organization, we'd do a safety share, a well-being share at the beginning of every meeting. And sometimes he'd talk about mental health and about, the effects of stress. And I think the more you can talk about these kind of things and normalize it, just like we talk about heart disease and diabetes and every other kind of illness, the more it encourages people to get help. I think that it seems that especially young people seem to be speaking more openly, probably brought on by all the tragedy they've seen with suicide and overdose. But we have a long way to go, I think, before we really break the stigma completely and people feel comfortable getting help. But, the one thing I would say to anybody who is thinking about these issues is if you're worried about somebody, say something to them, because I think people are nervous, again, related to the stigma that maybe they'll make it worse, that we don't talk about these things. You can't make it worse if you show somebody that you care, even if you don't know what the right thing is to say to them. Yeah. Expressing yourself in any way is helpful and help's available, through all kinds of channels and whether it be text or phone call or websites and the sort of the gateway to all those resources you can find through CommQuest site or Starkmar's site.
Sure. I was at an event for our company over the weekend, and the subject of stigma came up, and it's pretty simple. If you wake up in the morning and you have a stomach ache, you generally don't have any problem telling someone or asking for help. When you wake up in the morning and you're emotionally in pain in some way, whether it's depression or what have you, there's same thing goes. There's absolutely nothing wrong with reaching out for help and telling somebody and getting the help that you need. Now, you mentioned a couple of things about the corporate structure that you were in prior. What part of that world do you bring to CommQuest?
Well, there's more in common between businesses and organizations than people might think. I started my career at an automotive plant, at a forging plant, but then I spent a period of time in healthcare. And I remember when I made the transition from healthcare to a bearing company, I met up with an engineer who said, "What are you doing here? You've never designed a bearing. You've never made a bearing. You've never sold a bearing. How can you possibly help us?" And I was kind of taken aback, but there are common elements across every business. And what I said to her was, you've got a whole company of people who know how to design, make, and sell bearings. And I bring a different skill set. And I can, work with any sort of a product. It's the same kind of universal business principles. And I look back on that, and that was about 25 years ago, maybe closer to 30. But today, it's the same thing. I come to CommQuest. It's a different business, but basic business organization and processes and finding out what motivates people and encouraging people and being focused on a clear goal. These are all things that, whether you're, providing healthcare services or selling bearings or steel or in the behavioral health business, it's the same. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you look at CommQuest and a good dose of business experience is a really helpful thing to balance all of the great behavioral health experts that we have here. Sure. So I'm excited to be here. And every day when I face challenges, I think, okay, this isn't that complex. We just have to dig in and not overcomplicate a problem. Let's just find a solution.
Sure. I would guess that there has to be times when there are differences. For example, since you've come here and a certain subject comes up and you might say, well, that's going to be easy. I'll just have XYZ department take care of that. And you find out, no. So by contrast, what have you learned about the differences working for a nonprofit that maybe you didn't realize before?
Oh, yeah. Well, our resources are much more scarce.
Yes.
It started the first day, actually. I said, okay, give me the list of all of our key contacts outside the organization and all our key donors. Give me the list. Give me their phone numbers. Give me their names. I want to call them and introduce myself. And everybody looked at each other and there was no list, Yeah. The truth is, though, that it would be the same in many nonprofit organizations, but certainly in behavioral health organizations. It's not a business where you make a lot of money. When you treat Medicaid patients, it's going to be very narrow. You have to operate very efficiently, even to make money, let alone to have extra resources to get organized on, all the things you want to get organized on. And so it's always going to be a tight business financially. And so I think that makes it all the more important that we're as efficient as we can be with standardized processes across all of our facilities, with everybody working together as a team so that we don't waste a minute of time or a dollar on things that don't need attention.
Sure.
And so, I think that definitely is different. And there's also an element of, when you work at a public company, your shareholders are going to hold you accountable for making money. That's going to be the driving force. I've been fortunate, though, that I've worked at the last two companies that have had a very strong commitment to community, and a lot of public companies don't have that. So I've actually been fortunate that there was a real understanding that a strong community makes a strong business, and the Timken family has been real leaders in that kind of corporate responsibility. And so it was a good lesson for me working with that family in many capacities.
In broad terms, in terms of the organization, not just leadership, but everyone involved, what are some of the key differences in culture? And I can tell you, I worked in the for-profit sector most of my life. And most of my experiences have been fairly positive. I've been very lucky to be around good people, but I have had brushes with, the backstabbing, especially when commissions are involved and all of these other things. And I don't miss that. I don't miss that one bit. What are some of the key differences in the overall culture of a place like CommQuest, a nonprofit in general, that you really like or you would like to talk about?
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting. People are people, and I've had the opportunity throughout my career to work around the world with different people from different cultures. And while they may speak different languages and believe different things, and people are people. I think and it's fascinating to me to learn about people from all different backgrounds. What's different about this culture? There is such a sense of purpose, such a commitment to the mission. I talk about the little guy that I met my first week here and how I think about him nearly every day. Yeah. I think that most of the people who work here doing really difficult jobs that will, break your heart and make you feel burnout, they have their version of that little guy. I've asked them, what keeps you going when you see all of the problems that we have in society and the limited resources we have to solve them? And they say things like that one client who made a breakthrough. Mm-hmm. They all have their version of that little guy in their head, and it inspires them every day. But I think that what really strikes me about this culture at CommQuest is that, well, it goes back to, I guess, our promise to the community. Hope happens here. Yeah. That sense of hope that, we can make life better for people, and it's not going to be easy. And it's a really hard job, but it's a mission worth fighting for every day.
Sure. One of the things, by contrast, when people hear the term nonprofit in the common vernacular, that can mean, well, they don't need to make money. Okay. And the fact of the matter is the lights have to come on when you walk in the morning. The staff has to be able to take care of themselves. A lot of people have invested a lot of time and very advanced levels of education to be able to work here. So there is an important element of cash flow, but the metrics, I'm guessing, are a little bit different than what you said, like when you're accountable to shareholders mm-hmm. and in for-profit companies. So when you're evaluating, how is this place doing? What are some of the metrics that you're examining as opposed to a for-profit company?
It's actually, there's more in common than you'd think. Kind of business is business. I grew up in my mom and dad's little business. Their small business, literally had a cot in the corner, literally grew up in the business. And the difference between their business and the big companies I was in, and now this nonprofit organization I'm in, it's really very similar. I think that people maybe don't always think of it that way, though. Mm-hmm. And I like to say that, if we want this mission to be sustainable, we've got to be financially stable. We have to be financially healthy. That's what sustains the mission. And so, that's how I get people focused on that. And, I think that there's more access to information about a company's financial performance in the for-profit world in a public company, because companies are reporting it every quarter in great detail. There are analyst calls. The analysts ask a million questions. And, so one of the things that I found at CommQuest is that we don't talk enough about the financial performance. Mm-hmm. And so, we've started having meetings with an extended group of leaders across the organization to dive into the numbers mm-hmm. and help them understand them and, most importantly, understand what drives the performance. And I think then you couple that with what are the non-financial measures that sort of drive the performance and keep the organization stable. And it's things like, how many clients we're seeing, how many show up. The no-show rate in behavioral health is very high.
Sure.
And what's the productivity of our team? Are we getting our documentation in on time so we can bill? It's one thing to see a client, but if we don't finish all our notes and submit that for payment, we may have helped that client, but it's like it didn't happen. We don't get paid for it. So there's a whole series of indicators that we focus on to try to make sure that the organization is performing and performing for clients and performing financially.
Yeah. I understand from me to you, you're somewhat in a difficult situation there, because one of the things about this place and any nonprofit in the medical field is that you have people, like I mentioned before, who are very experienced, very well trained, and they could, quite frankly, make a better living in the private sector, but they're here because they want to be. And we certainly don't in any way, shape, or form want to break anyone's spirit. But by the same token, there still has to be functionality to the organization. There still has to be cash flow. We still have to make sure we're getting every dollar that we can. So it's a hard act to balance, because this is more of a caring marketplace, so to speak, than it is a for-profit market space. But we still want to make sure that we are sustainable. Right.
If we care, then we want to be here for another 100 years. And if we want to be here for another 100 years to serve that mission, you have to be financially stable.
Absolutely.
It all connects together. And, no one's going to get rich working in behavioral health. And we all choose to be here rather than somewhere else because we believe in the mission.
Yes.
But you have to be financially stable as well. And, we've talked a lot about finances. So I want to share one other thing.
Sure.
When I took the job here, as I was interviewing, I asked a couple of questions that I thought were pretty important. I knew that there were some financial challenges in the day-to-day operations, but what I wanted to know is how much cash do we have on hand? Because if you've got cash, you can sustain problems like COVID, problems, like behavioral health redesign in Ohio that really did cause a crunch for organizations. And the answer was a good one. And I said, okay, we're stable in that sense. Now our day-to-day performance maybe isn't where we want it, but that gives us a little bit of time to solve those problems. Sure. And again, as I look at the day-to-day performance of the organization, none of it's rocket science. It's just basic steps we need to take to, operate more efficiently. Sure. We use Lean Six Sigma methodology. We use daily problem solving as a kind of a way of thinking. And a real commitment to teamwork across the organization because, again, we can't operate as 14 different sites. We have to operate as one CommQuest.
Sure. Those are all great points. And speaking about direction, strategic guideposts, which are mission, vision, and values. Can you explain kind of just a little bit about what these are and why they are important for an organization like ours, including the members of leadership?
They are important for every organization, every group, everywhere, because if you're not clear about what you're trying to achieve and what your day-to-day mission is and how you're going to operate with each other, what your behaviors are, you're all just going to be working in your own independent areas, and we're not going to be heading toward a goal. So to me, the strategic guideposts say, why are we here? Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it right off the top that, our mission is to work together to care for people in those three pillars of service. And I think it goes even beyond that. We're not just doing day-to-day client care, but when you talk about the stigma that prevents people from getting help. I think we have an obligation as an organization to be leaders in the community, to talk about this, to show people a path to service, to talk about, how many people are impacted by mental illness and addiction, and that it's the same as any kind of physical disease that can be treated.
Right.
And so I think we have a responsibility to leadership too. So I think vision and mission, people understand those are important things that, every organization needs. But I think that the values of the organization, to me, that those are something that you need to spend a little bit of time on, because to me, the values are the behaviors of how we're going to operate, how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to treat clients. And so we've spent some time thinking about what are the values that help us achieve this mission and are the way we want to work. And we've come up with 4 of them. And when I say we, I've talked to employees, I've talked to people outside the organization, partners. We've had a lot of people engaged, our board of directors, in trying to figure out what is important to the organization. And so we kind of came up with 4. And the first is, we've talked a lot about stigma and how people who are experiencing mental illness or addiction are treated. And so our first one is dignity. We value the dignity of the individual. The second one, I mentioned this before, is teamwork. We know that we have to work together in service to this mission, and not just within the organization, but outside as well. Again, in working in the foundation world as a board member, I could see nonprofits need to work together to make efficient use of resources. So we work with other nonprofits to serve the community. The third one is, and again, we've talked about this throughout this conversation, is sustainability. We have to value sustainable results, both for our clients and for the organization. Right. And the last one is integrity. And that's just foundational, that we do the right thing. We always, when there's a decision to be made, we're going to say we're going to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Yeah. And that includes compliance and professional excellence, but it also is just, a commitment to always doing the right thing for each other and for the community. Yeah. So those are our values. Those are the things that's how we roll at CommQuest.
In regard to stigma, you mentioned the leadership. That's something that I just wanted to follow up with. A lot of times people will ask me when I work in a marketing department at a nonprofit, well, what exactly does a marketing department at a nonprofit do? And one of the things is raise awareness. The more the community around us knows about certain issues in the community that need work, the more they are to support the mission, and not just financially, but just in the common day way they refer to people who need help. A lot of times it impacts how people are going to vote on a given issue, or it might impact donations. So it's so important to have that leadership. CommQuest and the surrounding community, as we're talking about this, and you mentioned COVID, we've all been through some very unique challenges during the past year or two, which for most people's lifetimes has never happened before. Maybe the flu epidemic, which sparked the origin of our company of 100 years ago, was probably the last time. And with what's gone on, it has impacted nonprofits very hard. And a lot of people have had their lives turned upside down, in a lot of different ways by all of the restrictions, the social distancing. It's been very difficult. What message of hope would you have for organizations like ours and for the community at large? A lot of parents, for example, are dealing with homeschooling and things like that they never would have imagined they would have been doing a couple of years ago. So it's very challenging. What message of hope would you have for all of those people?
Well, you're not alone. I think that's where I would start. I think of our staff, and, our staff experienced as individuals all the things you just talked about. They're taking care of, their kids who suddenly home going to school. They're taking care of their families with all the stress that families are experiencing, and they're coming to work and helping everybody else do it as well. Mm-hmm. So I'd say to them and to everyone else in the community, you're not alone. We're in this together. Mm-hmm. And there's hope in that, because we can do anything as a team of people together, and help's available. Mm-hmm. So I think that I would start there. Yes,
that's such an important message. And you're not alone. That would be probably a good way to tie up our conversation. There are ways that you can reach out for help. CommQuest.org is probably one of the best places to start. And once again, that's CommQuest.org. There's some pretty detailed information there about all the services we provide. There's contact information there. There's ways that you can reach out and possibly get the help that you need. And we've been talking to Elaine Russell Reolfi, the Chief Executive Officer of CommQuest. It's been very nice talking to you, getting some insights into running the organization. Much appreciated. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you for what you're doing every day, because it is important that we talk out loud about these things, and you're helping us do that. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very generous. There's people in this organization who truly are making the world a better place. I just talk about it, but I guess that's important too.
It is.
All right. Very good. You've been listening to the Hope Discovered podcast by CommQuest. And again, to find out more about our organization, please visit CommQuest.org. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy your day.